I think that it remains part of the community, but you need to broaden the way that you look at cost-benefit investments. And I think that although this may seem counterintuitive, I think that going back to what was just said in terms of making sure that your stakeholders are brought in, I can't emphasize how important it is to get private sector large asset holders involved in a dialogue with those communities, because those large asset holders, as I had indicated before in my presentation, are actually bearing the burden in many cases of redistributed loss payments from many of those structures, from many of those risk management structures today. And if they bear it, and if they leave, then it even puts these communities in a worse position. So I think that integrating large institutions who are now undertaking the kinds of analytics which I outlined to assess risk to their own assets and getting them to share that information with those broader communities in a dialogue consistent with perhaps having a different redevelopment district is really what's going to happen. Because one of the things I didn't get to talk about is how these redistribution pools in many cases have exceeded their capacity. And so for just one specific, last November, as Florida does every year, they went out to the market to value their ability to meet their obligations to issue municipal bonds should one of these natural catastrophe events occur. And in short, the Attorney General for the state of Florida was forced to go back to their houses of legislature and explain in no uncertain terms that their brokers had told them, and this is documented in newspaper accounts, that they could not, in fact, sell in the current economic environment a sufficient number of those bonds to meet what their projected obligations are, and that is a suggestion that they are not economically stable in that context. And so these dialogues do need to be forced, but I'm not sure that framing it as a low-income issue is necessarily going to get the parties to the table who you need to solve this problem.
There was so much covered here, I can think of half a dozen follow-up questions, but let me move on to the next one, which maybe we addressed in a way. If a community is first starting, what do they do? Planning, get pricing, look at the insurance risk from the standpoint of communities that have done that. So Luca, and I think if Karen is still here, she may have left already. What do you recommend to community just getting started and looking at climate investments? What do they do first?
Well, that's Luca speaking now. In Copenhagen, I think the first thing was to show that or look at the risk, make the first risk assessment, saying, okay, can this actually happen in your city, and bringing that to the awareness of politicians and superior management in the city, saying this is an issue that we should address. And it was not an easy process. In Copenhagen, it actually took us about a year. We came back from a meeting in Tokyo in 2008 and said we think we should start working on this issue on a more sort of overall level in Copenhagen. And it took us a year to convince our senior management and our politicians that that was actually also a good idea before they gave us permission to start working on this, because there was so much focus